It's an honor to be with you all this morning, and I'm excited to share a little bit with you. I kind of feel like, if you don't know me, I sort of feel this pressure to let you know a little bit about me, so some of what I'm going to talk about is my opinion, and so if you don't kind of know a little bit about where that opinion is coming from, I feel the need to kind of explain it a little bit and expound a little bit on what Jared said, but it's also kind of awkward because it sounds like I'm kind of going through a resume a little bit, which is not my intention. But I've had experience as a youth pastor. I spent 10 years as a youth pastor, transitioned from that role into an executive pastor role at the same church as God would have it. And so I went from 10 years as a youth pastor to 8 years as an executive pastor. And at about 2014, while being the executive pastor on staff at a church, I felt compelled to start assisting other churches in the area of church consulting. And my master's degree is actually in organizational leadership, with a concentration in organization development consulting. So during that time, I started an organization with permission of the elders and my lead pastor to just help other churches when necessary. And that kind of grew over the years, and I had the opportunity to have some team members work alongside me in the area of coaching. I became an ICF certified coach, which is kind of the standard for business leadership coaching, and also a level 3 coach within the Sons of God. And so I started working with leaders in different ways. Because of my degree and some of my experience, I had the opportunity to work with some people in the secular world as far as organizational development consulting. And so I had this kind of peer into the secular world, and I say secular loosely, you know what I mean, the business world, and working with business leaders, specifically the C-suite, which is like CFO, CEO, COO. It kind of gave me a different perspective organizationally of how things happen within the business world and what that actually looks like within the church world. Not because I believe that there should be like this weird bleed over. So if you're sitting there saying, you know, the business has no place in the church, this is spirit-led, that's heresy. One, I think that's hilarious that you talk that way. Two, I kind of agree with you, but I think that the Lord gives us brains, and when we have the ability to utilize those brains for the furtherance of His kingdom, we should do that. And so what I started to do was leverage the finances that I was getting in the secular world towards assisting churches that couldn't otherwise afford it. And a real long story short, I resigned at my church that I was at as executive pastor, took a short sabbatical, because we knew our season there was done. Nothing had gone wrong. If you know me or you know that church, you can attest to that. It was just that season of ministry was closing. And so I spent about a year doing church consulting full-time and leadership coaching, and came to a crossroad where I had the ability to kind of lean into it and say, okay, is this what I'm actually going to do with the rest of my life? I had the opportunity to sign an extensive contract that would really sustain me in the organization for a while. Instead, I felt that the Lord hadn't released us from the local church. And so long story short, it led to us establishing a team, launching a church on the east side of Rochester. We've had our 10th week since launch, and things are going well in spite of us. And so God is doing some pretty cool things. And I had the opportunity to share a little bit last year as to some of the things that I gleaned in having kind of a front row seat to all these different organizations. And so I gave you all of that background and back information so that you can understand that I'm not coming here as like a specialist. I'm not coming here to preach. I'm coming here just to do a practical leadership talk. And so I'm going to basically take the information that I learned being a fly on the wall or a seat at the table of some of the tables, whether it be in organizations or in the church world. The size churches that I work with ranged from just under 15 all the way up to over 5,000 and everywhere in between. And so I'm currently still doing that full-time, so that's my job as far as income. I'm a full-time pastor, church planner, but I don't make any money doing that. Some of you are like, me neither. A little bit different. But in either case, so I'm still kind of in the throes of having those seats, those conversations. And so what I'd like to do, if I could, is just sort of take the best information of what it is that I've picked up on and then just share with you guys what it is that I think we could maybe all learn from those conversations that I've had. And so I'm going to talk about the principles that I've noticed and or have studied. And like I said already, some of it's going to be my opinion. Some of it is going to be stuff I've read. I read a lot of stuff, so if you're like, whoa, that sounds familiar, it's probably what you read. Okay, I don't mean to plagiarize it. It's just something I read. It stuck with me. Give credit to other people. I'm totally cool with that. My goal really is to just throw out some stuff that I think can help us as leaders, and then you can throw out the rest. And if I offend you, you can write it down and seriously give it to me, because I would find that awesome. But then, no, just kidding, give it to Mark. He'll offend you later anyway. I'm really fine with you throwing out whatever doesn't work in your situation, your environment. I know that this group is really diverse. I know that we have lead pastors, creative arts pastors, worship pastors, children's pastors, youth pastors, volunteers in ministries, lead pastors, associate pastors, executive pastors, and everywhere in between. So I understand that application, in a lot of ways, is going to be sort of your responsibility. I'm going to do the best to talk about timeless principles, and hopefully we find a place that's helpful. Last year I talked and focused mostly on self-awareness, and honestly, I could talk about that topic always. That can always be investigated. It's part of who we are. It has to be on the platform that we function in. The higher you go in an organization, the less self-aware you are. Everybody has to learn your language. They have to talk the way you prefer. And so being sensitive and aware to that is key for sure. But I picked up on something else this last year since we last met, since we last had a conversation. And that is really what I'm going to classify as a leadership pipeline crisis. And that was as like compelling as I could make it sound. There's a crisis in leadership pipelines. Leadership pipeline is kind of a buzzword phrase, if you will. Maybe you've heard it, maybe you've never heard it. But people say it often, like, I need to work on my leadership pipeline. Like, what are you talking about? It's really a business word that's been around since the 70s. I won't go into a lot of history of that. In the 70s, it was kind of created. It went into GE. GE kind of developed it into a leadership development pipeline. It was kind of adopted and perfected and published in a book somewhere in the early 2000s, and then they just came out with a revised edition in 2010, and the title of that book is, wait for it, Leadership Pipeline. And so that's why you have that language. It's this idea of how people are developed and moved up and through an organization. I think sometimes in the church world, we take a principle, a timeless principle, we try to apply it in the church world, and then we sort of jack it up because we try to use it in a way that it wasn't intended. So what I hear a lot is that a pipeline is a process to help people move forward, and so we need to get as many people as we can in our pipeline. That does not make sense. It's counterintuitive. If you're familiar with the language of the pipeline, it's really more similar to a pathway. And if it's a pathway, then trying to ram everybody onto a pathway to go somewhere some of them don't want to go can be really disruptive, super crowded, awkward. So think more in the context of creating a pathway for people to move in that's going to run very parallel and similar to what I would articulate as a disciple-making process. So as we kind of consider this idea of pipeline, I want to let you know, first off, if you're looking for that book, it is not an easy read. If you want to read it, you can go ahead. I'm going to talk about the things that I think matter from it and spare you the reading if you want. But when this idea kind of came into the church world, I've spent a lot of time with organizations working on pipeline development, and then also with churches. It takes months. In some cases, it takes years. I'm not going to pretend that through a short talk today that you're going to all leave this place being like, I totally understand it now. I'm going to execute with excellence. If you do, hey, praise God. If you don't, then it's Jared's fault. So, just making sure how many people are still listening to me. The creation of a pipeline is not as profound as it sounds, if it sounds profound. In fact, I would argue that you already have pipelines. You already have ways and systems in which people move through your organization. The question is, are they effective in the sense that they serve you, or are they counterproductive? Are they actually more problematic than they are helpful? And so I'm just going to talk about some problems that I see, and hopefully it will help you to avoid some things. How many of you guys have ever seen a show called Hard to Kill? Anybody? A couple. All right. So Hard to Kill is this, I don't even know that it's really a good show, but it's a guy by the name of Tim Kennedy, and he's a former Army Ranger and basically he puts himself in situations that are entertaining and could potentially kill him, and then he doesn't die. So there's the spoiler alert. I kind of feel like it can't really be called Hard to Kill unless some people have been killed while filming. And be like, that dude though, he's hard to kill. But anyway, that would be an entirely different show. So in either case, he did this. There was this one episode in particular that I watched where he was a bullfighter, and he goes in and he's being prepared for 3 days to learn how to be a bullfighter. And by bullfighter, they're the people that dress up like clowns. I didn't know that. I didn't know that like the people that dress up like clowns are considered bullfighters, and some of them train since the age of 5. Imagine that. And so he goes to this ranch and he shows up, and there's a guy that's pretty clearly not happy to see him. He thinks that he's basically making a mockery of his profession, because he's saying there's people that have been doing this since they could walk. You think you're going to show up in 3 days and go to a rodeo and be a bullfighter, you're going to get somebody killed, probably yourself. I'm like, okay, show's getting a little better now. What if they fight? Is he really hard to kill? Because I think that bullfighter can kill him. In either case, we start watching this show, and they start with the first time. He goes, all right, are you ready? We're gonna let a bull go. He's like, yup. Like, no training at all. He's like, all right, here we go. You ready? Yep. You ready for it? Yep. They open up the gate, and the dude comes out with a wheelbarrow with horns on the front of it. And he comes over, and he's like kind of laughing until the dude clips him. He's like, what the heck? And he's like, yeah, you're dead. I was like, whoa, all right, that's intense. And I'm thinking, it'd be funny if the dude was sitting in the wheelbarrow actually acting like a bull, but that's just because I have a little bit of ADD, and I just start thinking about how they could have made the show better. In either case, he'd be like, I'm the bull. Anyway, so he kind of comes at him, and so he's sort of moving out of the way. And he goes, you know what, the best way for you to learn this is with an actual animal. And he says, this is footwork based, and so he kind of goes through some footwork, and there's just one guy there that's kind of coaching him alongside, and he's a famous bullfighter. He's broken his neck like 7 times. He's been gored. He's had punctured lungs. The dude walks like he can barely walk, and it just is like, why do people do this for a living? And he's explaining how there's footwork involved, and how you actually have to go against your natural inclination. That as the bull is charging you, you have to move towards it and to the side. That you actually have to put yourself in danger's way and move to the side, because in moving towards the bull can't pivot and move quickly. So you have to move at it. He's like, okay. He's like, you got it? He's like, yeah. He's all right, we're going to put the first bull out. So the bull comes out. It's not a bull, it's actually a cow. It has no horns. And so he feels like he's insulted by it until this bull comes at him, and it just starts bumping him around and knocking him down. And then he's like, okay, I'm glad this thing doesn't have horns. So then they keep sending in bigger and faster bulls. And then there's this one bull that comes out, and its horns are kind of turned down and back. And he's moving in, and they're yelling at him the whole time, step towards it, stop being afraid. And at one point he goes, Army Ranger, Army Ranger, you ran pretty good. And he's like, so Tim Kenny's like furious. He's like, all right, I can do this. And so they put in this bull, and this bull comes at him, and in a moment of brilliance, he does what every human being in this room would do when you're about to get nailed by something. You're like, this thing's gonna knock me down. You put your hand out like this and step back. That's exactly what he does. He steps back and puts his hand down, and this bull comes in, hits him in the midsection, throws him up in the air, and just tosses him like a rag doll. Flies up in the air, boom, falls on the ground, and totally rings his bell. They pull him aside, and they're like, you're gonna get killed. You're gonna kill somebody else. You're not ready. And he's sitting there, and he's like totally shaken and rattled, and he looks at the camera and he goes, I have no business being here. I have no business being here. Have you ever been in ministry? Hey, you guys followed with me, right? I'm like looking at the camera, I have no business being here. I almost died, someone else almost died. Why am I here? What were they thinking? What am I thinking? Listen, it's not a statement of humility. It's an acknowledgement of being inadequately prepared. So I want you to consider for a second, is there a possibility that you've been inadequately prepared for what it is that leadership really requires of you? That in that moment when things are charging at you, you do everything that leadership acumen tells you to do, everything that makes sense, all of the training that you have to be strong and brave, and all the things that certainly an Army Ranger is, but in that moment you don't have the skills required to navigate the moment you're in. Now, before you get defensive or think that I'm confirming some lie that Satan is whispering to your heart, let me clarify. There's a difference between being called and being prepared. I'm not questioning your calling. Satan's questioning your calling. It's the whispers of the enemy that says you're not good enough, you'll never measure up, you can't do this, you're not a good enough leader. What in the world are you thinking? I'm not saying that. I'm not questioning your calling. I'm questioning your preparation. Are you prepared? God has called you. Preparation is our choice. It's our choice. Like it or not, you choose whether or not to. Oh, but you don't understand. My lead pastor, my board, my blah, 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 wine. No. Preparation is on you. It's up to you. Are you prepared? Are you doing the things necessary to prepare yourself? So keep that in mind. Put it in the back of your head as we start going back to this idea of pipeline. Because there's all different forms of pipelines. And I'm not here to talk about models and to discuss models specifically. I'm talking about timeless principles and concepts that you can apply into your environment, regardless of whether you're leading a ministry or a church or something entirely different. All pipelines, regardless of their forms, start and end in the same place. They start with self-leadership and they end with organizational leadership. That's a pipeline. Start with self-leadership, end with organizational leadership. What happens in between in that pipeline is entirely different based on the environment, the culture, the ministry, department, whatever it is that you're involved in. But if they all have the same starting point and they all have the same end point, I'm going to talk about the start point and the end point because it has the most application to all of our environments. Something I've noticed is that ministry environments are an outflow of how well or how poorly the leader leads themselves. It doesn't sound super profound, right? I mean, if you thought about it for a little while, you'd say, okay, yeah, I agree with that. But oftentimes we don't do anything about what isn't very profound, right? Because I talked about this idea of preparation. And so if we're talking about preparation and we're talking about the outflow of effectiveness in ministry having to do with how well we lead ourselves, then we're talking about a problem we have the ability to solve. And yet oftentimes we have excuses as to why we aren't solving it. Now, I'm not talking when I say how well or how poorly a leader leads themselves has to do with the outflow of ministry. I'm not talking about the outflow of success of ministry as you might define it. And most people define success in ministry as growth, and I think Stephanie's going to talk about success in ministry, so I'll stay away from that topic, be excited about tonight. I'm not going to talk necessarily about what that looks like. I'm just going to use kind of the dummy example of what we all feel in the tension of growth. And you can redeem it as much as you want. Like, no, I'm not talking about numbers. I'm talking about souls. That's so spiritual. Yeah, you're still talking about people and numbers. You know, one thing that every church measures, regardless of whether they're 15 or 5,000, they measure attendance. Every church measures attendance. And I'm not going to spend a lot of time on measuring the wrong things, but the reality is we measure the wrong things. Every church measures two things, attendance and finances. Neither of them are an indicator of success on any level in the context of actual health, right? Because I'll tell you right now, I can do a raffle for a Mercedes. And I'm like, listen, you want this Mercedes? You have to come every Sunday for the next 3 months. And my church would blow up. Why? Because they want the car. And the minute the car got given away, everybody would be angry and they'd be leaving because they didn't win the car, blah, blah, and then it would literally go right back to the same attendance. In fact, it'd probably be less because the families that were core that really thought they deserved that car because I used their tithe money for it, they'd be angry and they'd leave. And of course, I'd be an idiot, obviously. But it's an example of how you can create growth. If the goal is growth, you do some stupid, unhealthy things in order to move people into a pipeline. But here's the deal. Jesus said he'd build his church. And the gates of hell would not prevail against it, right? So the growth of the church is not your responsibility. I come in contact with a lot of leaders that are losing a lot of sleep, feel a lot of pressure from their lead pastor or other people because their ministry isn't growing. Now,
before you're like, that's right, I need to get this on video. I'm going to record this so I can tell my pastor that it is not a sign of health. One thing that you can also say is I've never seen something healthy not grow. Okay? So growth is an outflow of health. But if we pursue growth, we compromise a lot of things. If we think of it as an outflow, we focus on the right thing. So then what is our role? What is it that we are to focus on? Our role, if Jesus is going to build a church, our role is to make disciples. To make disciples, this great commission. This idea that we are to go and make disciples. And I could spend a whole lot of time on this. If you've heard me speak before, I probably have spent more time on this, with the idea that that's a participle there in the text. That Jesus is literally saying that as you go, what's the command? Make disciples. So the only command in the text is to make disciples. So then I ask the question, how do you make disciples? Are you making disciples? If your role is to make disciples by creating and maintaining disciple-making environments, that includes equipping them for the work of the ministry. But oftentimes we're doing everything but that. Oftentimes we're not sitting down, navigating, contemplating the disciple-making environments. We're planning an event or an activity or busyness or something other than the one thing that Jesus has called us to do. And then we say, why don't we have the results that we desire? Why aren't people growing in their faith? It's because you're just keeping them busy. And you're getting really tired. And who cares? It's kind of a sad story if you're not aware of it. That's why I think self-awareness is so key. But if you're not careful, perceived success, growth in ministry, will have you assume that you're doing something right. So we had these beans that we planted for our kids, and we had this idea, in fact it was an illustration, where we're trying to maintain an environment so that we can see growth. And so we're going to maintain the environment of these beans to see what it is that God does. So we maintain the environment, God grows the plant, right? And that's the way that our churches should function. We maintain the environment, and God grows the church. And so my son, that's out on the porch, my son goes, I don't water my beans. I was like, what? He goes, yeah, I don't have to. It's like, why don't you have to? My son's 16. No, he's 6. He's 6. That would be awesome, though. He's like, no, I don't have to, Dad. I don't have to. I'm like, why do you think you don't have to water them? Because my beans don't need to be watered. I was like, yes, they do, hon. They need to be watered. No, they don't. They don't. See, what he didn't realize is that we had about 3 consecutive days of rain, and his bucket of beans were to the side, and as the rain was running from the side, it was being watered by rain. And what was happening is his plants were actually growing at a faster rate than his sisters, and he saw his sisters water their plants. He thought, I know the problem. They're watering them. They should stop. I'm not going to water my plant. We do that in ministry. God brings the growth. And we go, oh, I got it figured out. We just do this. And sometimes we compromise disciple-making environments because we see what we think is perceived success. We did an event and everyone came. A ton of kids came. God's in this. Next time, bigger and better. Right? And we compromise the health of our ministry. Why? Because of perceived success. So, how well are you leading yourself? How well is it that you're leaning in so that you can be aware of the things that are in proximity and close to the heart of God, and what things are simply the culture redefined? Because we do ripped off versions of what the culture does better, and then we celebrate it as a win. And quite honestly, it's embarrassing. And it's awkward for people that come, because they're like, oh yeah, my baseball team does this better. Like, we love you here, though. Well, they love me too. Jesus, you run away. You see, I'm discovering a lot of people are leading in roles in churches because of their skill set, and they leapfrogged an unclear leadership pipeline. So bear with me for a second. If I show up at a college, university, and I walk in and I go, yes, I just graduated from high school and I'd like my doctorate. Where would I enroll for the doctoral program? You'd be like, well, you would enroll for the bachelor degree right down there. No. I would like to be a doctor. I get it. You start with a bachelor's degree. Oh no, I'd like to start at the top. Like, well, you are an imbecile. You need to move. You know, right? Why? Because there's a process, right? The bachelor's degree builds on the education that you prove in your high school years, and then your undergrad gives you the platform to then apply to a master's or doctoral program, and it continues to build on itself. It's progressional. Why is it not progressional in the church world? Right? I'd like to leap to the front. Oh, are you available? Are you teachable? Are you tithing? You're in. We leapfrog. But we don't only permit opportunity for people to leapfrog, we ourselves are leapfroggers. So sometimes we end up in positions that we're not adequately prepared for. It's interesting that if you want to be a pilot, you need to put in hours, like a log. You don't graduate from pilot school and then be like, see that 747? Like, yeah, you read the books real good, son. She's yours. Thanks, Pa! All right, everybody, here we go, we're gonna fly. I think I got an A in takeoff. You know, like, it doesn't happen, right? You have to sit and put in the hours to the point of annoyance and probably insult. Like, I know how to fly a plane. You don't have enough hours yet, but I know how. It doesn't care. They don't care. Put in the hours. But we provide opportunities in ministry, environments, and culture to say, listen, because of your skill set, you can leapfrog over the hours, you can leapfrog over the preparation, and boom, you're in. Lead it. You're welcome. And it crushes us. It crushes us. Or we have perceived accidental success. It inflates our pride, puts us in a position we have no business being in, and we morally fail or burn out. That's the reality. Sad, true, destruction of our own making. I'm not sure. Are there other reasons where people are well prepared and they just don't have the situation or the parameters set up, the boundaries set up spiritually? Of course. I'm speaking in generalizations. I'm speaking about principles that I've witnessed. And so when you consider the reality of leading yourself as the entry point of a pipeline, don't simply look at it to others and say, right, I need to make sure that others that enter my pipeline need to be able to lead themselves. You have to look at yourself and say, how well am I leading myself? Leading yourself in the pipeline is not something you ever graduate from. It's something you continually visit. I have to daily decide I'm going to lead myself in submission to the truth of the gospel and be wrecked daily by what it is that Christ has done for me and who I am in Christ. Otherwise, my pride puffs up, or I end up being crushed under the expectation of others because I want their approval so badly. And the list goes on. And so, as you enter into this idea, I want to submit to you a pipeline in its simplest form looks like the ability to lead yourself, then you lead others, then you lead leaders, then you lead a department, and then you lead an organization. Oftentimes we take people and say, you know what, I'm not sure if they're leading themselves real well, but how about you become a leader of leaders? And they've never even led others. Or, you did real good in Bible college. You should be the leader of an organization. A nonprofit organization. Day one, you're the CFO, CEO, and COO. Why? Because you have a degree and you can speak good. That's stupid. That's stupid. No wonder the world's like, wow, that church is a joke. It's because we're inadequately prepared more often than not. And listen, I'm not trying to give you a gloom and doom story. I'm saying if you are self-aware to come to grips with that, then you can get help in the areas you are deficient. But if you're going to keep up the facade and say, oh, no, I'm a pastor, I don't need any help with that. I don't need any help with my budget. You sure about that, Tiger? You sure? Right? So, at what point do we get to a place, not even of humility, but the recognition of, I have no business being here. I need help. I need help. The greatest leaders that go the furthest are the ones that throw up their hand in the moment and go, wait, I need help. I don't know what the heck I'm doing. I don't know. I'm lost here. I don't know anything. Can someone help me? And so are you willing to get to a place where you lead yourself? Leaders that want vision for their ministry or their churches, I hear that a lot. I just want to clarify the vision. I want to clarify the vision of my church. I want to clarify the vision of my ministry. Oftentimes have no vision for their own life. So in my environments, I say, well, let's talk about where you're at. What's the vision that you have for your life? What's the vision that you have for your marriage? What's the vision that you have for your kids? What's the vision you have for your life? Because how in the world are you going to cast vision for an organization when you have no vision for yourself? How well are you leading yourself? And so I ask you this morning to contemplate, do you have a vision for your life? Do you have a vision for your marriage, your family, whatever that looks like in your context? If you want a vision for your ministry, start with yourself. And so here's a practical way to do that. Go on a retreat. In its simplest form, it's this. Write out every role you fill. Son, husband, father, pastor, Christian, whatever those roles are. 5, 6, 7 of them, whatever. And then I want you to just consider, I'm giving you a crash course or something, all right? So bear with me. As you get those buckets, just say, this is where I want to be a year from now. And just write a sentence. As a husband, I want my wife to know that she's the most important person on the face of this earth to me. Second only to God. Write that down. So, if that's the desired outcome at the end of the year, what do you have to do in the next 6 months to get there? And all of a sudden it starts to get messy. That's when people are like, yeah, I'm tired. I don't know, it sounded good till then. Like, I know what I am. I can put my roles down. I can even maybe, if I spend some time, figure out like where I want to be. But like doing something about it, I'm just not wired that way. Then maybe you have no business being where you are. And I'm not talking about you, I'm talking about us. Because we are all so lazy. And so when you say, where do I want to be in 6 months? Then you can say, what do I have to do in the next 3 months? And then you can say, so what do I have to do next month? And then you can say, what do I have to do this week so that my wife knows I love her? You can put those things down. You can put them in your calendar so that you memorize them, you remind them that all of a sudden it's like, you know, write a letter to my wife. Oh, right, I need to write a letter about how much I appreciate love her. Whatever that looks like, put it in. It's not insincere to put reminders in your calendar about being a parent, right? No, put stuff down, you idiot, and call your child. Oh, good. You know, I write notes to myself that are belligerent. Like, you moron, did you seriously forget this? You had to have your alarm go off? Like, lead yourself. Lead yourself. If you don't take responsibility to lead yourself, someone else isn't going to. This is your one and only life, and you have a calling from God to do something with it. Lead yourself. If you can't lead yourself, you will poorly lead your ministry. And the truth is, you will have no business being there if you're unwilling to prepare yourself. God will do what only He can do, but we have a responsibility to do what it is He's called us to do. And so organizational leadership, that's personal leadership. Organizational leadership universally, making disciples. Specifically, how do we make disciples here? How do we do discipleship here in your ministry? In organizational leader circles in churches, how do we create and maintain disciple-making environments in our culture? Those are questions that leaders should be asking. That's what you should be wrestling with. And I want to tell you, you can do a retreat in a similar way. What are the things that we want to see? What are the outcomes that we want to see as an organization, as a ministry, as a church, whatever? How do we execute that in the next 6 months? What does it look like in the next 3 months, in the next week? What do we have to be working on? Most of us won't do that. Why? Because we're lazy. It's easier to run a program, to do events, to adopt a model, and then to misapply them all, than it is to do the hard work of understanding your culture. It's easier to plug and play. It's just easier. That's why you do it. We come up with a million reasons why. Well, you don't understand. I'm bivocational. Okay, I make nothing from my church. Darn it. There's no excuse. You can make excuse, but there's, oh, I'm really busy. We're all busy. But you like binge watch Netflix till your eyeballs roll out of your head, right? You'll find time to do the stuff that you really value. Listen, there's no coincidence that in Romans, leaders, people with the leadership gift, are called to lead with what? Diligence. It says it right in Romans. Leaders lead with diligence. Work hard. Why? Because Paul knew, God knows, you're not going to do it. You got to work hard. Roll up your sleeves. Do the work of the ministry. And even in diligence, you can be working on the wrong things. So are you wrestling with disciple-making problems? I see leaders abdicate what they should be doing and doing what they should delegate. All the time. Why? Well, because I like this. Okay. That's fine. You can like it. And you can do what you like, as long as you're doing the things that only you can do. Are you doing the things that only you can do? Or are you abdicating them? Are you leading leaders? Because as the point leader in your ministry or whatever that looks like, so right now I'm speaking to point leaders for a second, are you leading leaders or are you stepping over your leaders to lead the people? Why? Well, because I find identity when they call me pastor. Because I care for them and I shepherd them. They want me there. No, you want them to want you there. Because you haven't empowered and released leaders to lead them. And so are you creating a pipeline to say, listen, we're going to equip you to do this? Well, it's more fun to do the things that they do. That's cool. Then quit your job and be a youth leader or be a children's worker or something like that. But when you chose to be the point leader, you chose to lean in with diligence and to equip other people for ministry. And you can still do the things you love as long as you're doing the things that only you can do. And so I'm going to talk about some dangerous models real quick as I wrap things up. Stop using other people's messages. Stop it. It is an affront to the truth of the gospel and what it is that we're called to do. I don't know who you are. I'm not talking to you personally. If you want to say that, you can think like, no, I told you one time. Okay, then I'm talking to you. I'm talking to the whole room of people. It's got to stop. It's an epidemic that we have the ability in our generation to draw a line and say, this is not going to define us. Listen, we should be struggling and wrestling with the truth of the text so that it takes root in our hearts. So that when we get up in front of people, we can communicate the truth that God has given us and pour it out to them. The idea that we would take someone else's message and then communicate it, you're just a communicator. And there's better communicators in our world that don't love Jesus at all. And I could just give them my sermon notes, and they'll come up and eloquently say things in profound and amazing ways. But if you're a pastor, wrestle with the text. Wrestle with the application. Spend time crying because of the conviction of the Holy Spirit on your life as you read through this. Let the text wreck you. Otherwise, what in the world are you doing? It's not leading. You're not pastoring. Bill Clem said this thing, and it's amazing, in Christianity Today, I think it was. He was one of the pastors on staff of the site that Mark Driscoll led out in Seattle. And he said, I see an epidemic in society today where we have diminished the role of a site pastor to a dog with a handwritten note in its mouth. Boom. I was like, oh my God. But we have. Right? So you site pastor, here, listen, just say this. Just say this. In a lot of our church environments, we have growth without eldership. It's an epidemic. It's got to stop. We hire people that have leapfrogged a pipeline. And we put them in and say, hey, you're a department head now. Hey, you're a leader of an organization now. Hey, you're a leader of leaders. We don't know if you can lead yourself, but in a 5-minute interview, you kind of convinced us you could. And so now you're it. It's a problem, and it's not biblical. In fact, they have a word for it in the Bible. It's called a hireling. It's called a hireling, where you hire people to do the shepherding work for the purpose of their income and stability. It's not pastoral ministry, and it's got to stop. And so I have nothing to lose here except to say, I see this front row where they're like, I don't know what the problem is. I'm saying, does that person have any eldership ability whatsoever? Well, they're not an elder, well, but they're a pastor, which is eldership. Oh, right. Well, yeah, right. I was like, oh, here does pastor just a title, like Mr. or Mrs. or Reverend or like, well, no. Okay, so then it's eldership. So if it's biblical eldership, then do they fulfill the requirements for biblical eldership? And I'm not there to question. Don't paint me in that picture. I'm not trying to question people. I'm just saying this is what the Word of God says, and we have a responsibility to wrestle with it. We have a responsibility to wrestle with it. Some people will say, you know what, though, our culture and technology, it provides an opportunity for us to use other people's messages, and we should leverage everything that we've been given. Well, the fact is, in the New Testament, Paul could have said, hey, here, I wrote this message. Can you give this to Timothy and have him preach it at his church? Like, they could have done that, John, right? We act as though, like, they were incapable of communicating. But now, in today's age, we can talk, so we should leverage that. No, like, we have to wrestle with the text. And so, here's the deal. If you don't like this, throw it out. I don't care. Like, really. I said, keep what you want, throw out the rest. Take what you want, throw out what you don't. If I've offended you in some way, if you're like, no, I will continue to use other people's messages, and I'm going to tell you why. Come on up, I'd love it. But the point is, I have nothing to gain, and I have nothing to lose. I'm cool. I'm just telling you what I believe to be a leadership pipeline crisis in the church today. And we have the ability to address it. It's not you and them, it's us and we. We have the ability to do something. Where we create gospel-centered environments, where we wrestle with the text and we apply and we lean into the messiness of life and we walk alongside people. And if growth comes, it's because Jesus is adding to the numbers daily, not because we're trying to grow an organization. But it starts by leading yourself and looking at a pipeline. Thanks.